Thank you. One more stuff. I just want to tell you, I did an interview for IFL, and they removed my interview, a few hours ago, because I said to this piece of shit, Frank Warren, who said a lot of bad things after my win against Zhang. He talked a lot of shit, and he told me that why you even consider Hrgović a boogeyman? Why you even consider him a prospect? Do you understand now why they consider me a prospect? I asked him, does he understand now? The guy who I beat came in London and demolished his guy. I hope so now he understands everything. And also his hype job, Daniel Dubois, I sparred him in London a few years ago. I destroyed him as well. He postponed the fight after the sparring session with me. So Frank Warren, you producing a hype jobs, and shut your fucking mouth up, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your time, Philip.
Don't remove this. Don't be a pussy. Don't remove this interview.
I won't. Don't worry. I'll keep it up. But thank you all all the best, and look forward to you back in the ring.
Dogs make fights. He's a big southpaw. He's a big awkward southpaw with very heavy hands. Doesn't change my opinion on anything else. I just think that does Joe Joyce go into the immediate rematch? I'd probably say no. I'd probably say go somewhere else, go and rebuild like Daniel Dubois did. He can still do that.
Zhang is hoisted up by Sean George's trainer, and the Zhang camp go absolutely wild.
So the fight was stopped in the 6th. Joe Joyce with a massive swelling on his right eye, which we have learnt today. There is no broken bone in that eye socket or anything, which is good news, but it did look awful. His eye was almost completely closed. He was really, I thought, humble in defeat afterwards. That's his first professional loss. And Zhang's power was just amazing in that. Also, lots of conversation around the fact that it was southpaw. That's quite awkward. Whether or not Joe Joyce had enough practice against the southpaw, we'll find out in a minute, because we're going to be speaking to George Warren, CEO of Queensberry Promotions. After the fight, Joe Joyce was asked about whether or not he would take a rematch with Zhang. Here's what he said.
Yeah, possibly. I'll discuss with my team, see what my options are. It doesn't look good, taking the rematches really recently. I seem so maybe I'll take another one in the meantime or something like that, man. But yeah, I'll just say, sorry to my fans and friends and family for disappointing you. I thought I'd get the win here, and I'll be back.
Okay, there we go. Let's speak more about this. I'm a big fan of Joe Joyce, I really am, and it's sad to see him lose a fight, his first professional loss. That was a big performance from Zhang. Let's speak to the CEO of Queensberry Promotions, George Warren. Good morning, George.
Morning, George.
Morning, guys. How are you?
All right, George, thanks so much for coming on this morning. Tell me about what you saw in that fight and how disappointed Joe is.
Yeah, listen, Joe's obviously gutted. We're gutted for him. We're obviously very happy for Gillet. It was a great performance. I think it came down to a bit of tactics as well. I think Gillet, he boxed incredibly well. You got to take your hat off to him. Joe struggled with that southpaw stance. Gillet was landing very comfortably with his left throughout in those early stages, and I think one of the things that maybe the team need to assess from Joe's perspective is and I'd like to understand a bit about why they did it, was the weight difference between how he weighed against Joe Parker and for this fight. But look, this is what happens. Big fights, it's always going to end up with someone winning, someone losing. It wasn't Joe's night. It would have been interesting to see how the fight would have gone had his eye not gone and it hadn't closed. Not to suggest that Gillet would have continued to dominate as he was in some of those early rounds. But Joe's always a slow starter. We saw that in the fight with Joe Parker. I think Parker was probably winning that at probably about the 4th or 5th round stage until Joe stepped on the gas and started to box incredibly well. So it's just one of those things. It happens, but it doesn't mean that overnight Joe Joyce is not a threat to anyone in the heavyweight division. He's still a world-class operator. We've got another heavyweight now in this mix, and it's great for him, and it's great for Chinese boxing.
George, what was the difference in the weight you're talking about?
He weighed in. He was about a stone lighter for this fight compared to Joe Parker. My understanding is it was a little bit to do with his nutrition for the fight. I think he obviously wanted to maybe try and be a bit quicker. But you're fighting a guy, a southpaw. Joe hasn't fought a southpaw now for quite some time. I think it's got to be about 10, 11 fights or so. And I think the tactic was to come in and to be light and trying to avoid that left for the first few rounds until Gillet started to tire. But he couldn't get out of the way of that left hand, and it was hard to watch at times. But all Joe Joyce fights early on are quite hard to watch because that's the style that he's got. He comes forward, and that's what his name is. He's the juggernaut, and usually his chin holds up as it did in that fight, and he works out a way to get on top of these guys, and just with that relentless come forward stamina of his, he imposes himself on these guys and naturally usually gets on top of them. But with the eye and the eye closing, I think the ref was spot on with the stoppage. It left him with obviously no choice but to have obviously the fight to finish at that point.
Did he, just asking about his preparation, you're saying he hasn't fought a southpaw for a really long time. He acknowledged that as well. Was he sparring against southpaws? Was he prepared? Because the criticism will come that people will say he was underprepared for it. Do you think he was?
No, he would have been. Obviously Joe's based out in Vegas when he trains, and he's got a great trainer in Salas, one of the most respected trainers in the world. They would have prepared. They knew what they were getting into. But as I say, just sometimes it just doesn't gel on the night, and he did struggle with that southpaw stance. But at the end of the day, you got to take your hat off to Gillet. He came, he saw, he conquered, he put on a great performance, and good luck to him.
You're right, it does mix up the heavyweight division, doesn't it? But what do you think is next for Joe? What would be the right fight for him next?
I think it's a bit too soon. We've got, Gillet is under contract with Queensberry for the foreseeable future, and he's got a great team, a great group of people that we work with. For him, his management team are very friendly and good to work with. If Joe wants that rematch, it's his right to invoke it. It's not ours. Our relationship with Gillet would continue if he doesn't. He's got that decision to make. He can do it immediately, to take a fight, and then we could look to revisit it later in the year. I think at the moment we've got to see how bad that eye is. At first thought, it doesn't look like there's a break, which is obviously encouraging, but it's going to need some time to heal. We're going to have to assess it. He's going to have to look at the performance and what went wrong. But that decision on that rematch is down to his. It would be a big fight again, but if it isn't that fight, Joe will be in big fights, Gillet will be in big fights. There's so much activity in heavyweight boxing, and this is what it's about. You want to see fights where you don't know the outcome, and that's what we got on Saturday.
Yeah, George, thank you very much, mate. Enjoy your day.
Thanks, George.
Thank you very much. Cheers, guys. All the best.
Thank you. Big things to come in the heavyweight division. It needed something like this, I think. You don't want to see Joe Joyce lose, but to have another name step up, another challenger as well, it does make it more exciting. Our thanks there to George Warren, CEO of Queensberry Productions, or Promotions, apologies. Coming up next, we are going to be discussing...
So I guess there's no denying the fact that I'm not a big Joe Joyce fan. I was intrigued by the guy for a minute, just for a very short period of time, and then I got to see him and I thought, listen, not buying into this nonsense. This guy is a very poor boxer indeed, and on top of which he's very, very arrogant. He's a very arrogant know-it-all. There is nothing that infuriates me more than a person who is ignorant and also arrogant and extremely limited. Those are the kind of people who I consider to be dangerous because they tend to buy into conspiracy theories and never seem to want to think out of the box, even though they seem to feel that somehow they are thinking out of the box by doing something that is detrimental to their own progress. I think that Joe Joyce had a lot of criticism for other people, which sort of conformed with everybody else, as a matter of fact, of Anthony Joshua specifically. Because let's face it, let's keep it above. If you look at the external politics of this, or maybe the unpronounced or subtext of what Joe Joyce says, and the kind of people that he appeals to, you could argue, and I'm not suggesting that this is absolutely the case, but you could argue that Joe Joyce was coming across as that favourable sort of black British boxer, very simple and very simple-minded, very simple to understand, very simple-minded. And the criticism, and here we can go back to what Anthony Joshua was saying when he supposedly had this thing about what Lomachenko said. You could say that that truly does apply to Joe Joyce, and he embraced it. And I personally found it a bit irritating, while other people chose to celebrate it. And I think they're overcompensating for Joe Joyce based upon his limitations. What is admirable about a guy who can fucking take a punch in the face and keep on coming? I suppose, yeah, to a certain degree, because we don't want to be in their shoes, and we can admire the fact that they have a higher pain tolerance or threshold than some of us. But at the same token, it doesn't necessarily exhibit profound thinking or exquisite skill. It doesn't. And this is a guy who was in the amateurs. This means that this guy, he had a lot of amateur experience, by the way. A lot of amateur experience, by the way. And based upon the fact that he had all the amateur experience, you would think that he would have some skill. He would have taken something away from that. This is a guy who was rooted in a particular way of thinking and became absolutely intransigent, inflexible in his approach to boxing, despite the fact that he then sort of tried to sell himself as a non-conformist. A non-conformist in the sense that he refused to sign with Eddie Hearn, based upon the fact that he wanted to be an outlier who didn't do so. And then sort of becomes a sort of secondary bootlicker to Daniel Dubois, first of all. And then, of course, he'll never surpass Tyson Fury. He's more or less begging for a fight from Tyson Fury right now, and that's definitely out of the window now. He's a secondary fighter, and I honestly believe that he could have progressed a lot further than this. But instead, he chose to join everybody else, despite the fact that he sold himself as a conformist, as a non-conformist, forgive me. As a non-conformist, he chose to get involved with everybody else and go in on Anthony Joshua. Anthony Joshua this, Anthony Joshua that, his head is gone, he's this, he's that, he's blah blah blah. Parroting the nonsense that Frank Warren was feeding him. And let me say once again, one more again, when you look at what Anthony Joshua said, I'm not a big fan of Anthony Joshua, not by a long shot, but it applies to Joe Joyce in a way that probably I wouldn't have thought of. I wouldn't have necessarily sort of wanted to bring up. But it applies. The reason is this. The reason why somebody like Teddy Atlas and all these fans of Joe Joyce, Big Joe, they love the whole big black dude. You know what I'm saying? They love that. Big Joe. They love it. But Big Joe had no fucking skills. Big Joe didn't have a lot of skills. And this is why I do not sort of subscribe to the idea, this thing where everybody sort of says like, oh, isn't it a shame, blah, blah, blah. It was just a bad style for Big Joe. No, anybody who could box was a bad style for fucking Big Joe. Big Joe was never a good boxer. Big Joe sucks as a boxer. And Big Joe is a hater. Big Joe deserves all the criticism he's getting right now because Big Joe is a fucking hater. You know what I mean? He's a bigger hater than Daniel Dubois. That fucking dumbass. So this is the reason why I don't buy into this. So you heard the lady on the radio there. I'm a big fan of Big Joe. Why are you lying? You probably didn't give a fuck about the dude. You probably don't know what the fuck the guy does. He's just a big lump. Why the fuck are you a big fan? A big fan. Why are you a big fan of Joe Joyce? You might say, yeah, I kind of like watching him. But a big fan of Joe Joyce? Based upon what? The guy's trash. The guy's trash. And he got exposed by a guy who targeted him well and got rid of him. And to be honest, it was coming. It was fucking coming. You know what I'm saying? What the fuck? How is it if we can say these things? We saw this with Junior. Chavez Jr. Chavez Jr. had a chin too. You know what I mean? Chavez Jr. had a chin, but he lacked discipline. When it comes to Big Joe, I'm not sure he has discipline, but he's definitely one of the most arrogant and ignorant dudes in boxing, and that's why I don't give him a pass. That's why anybody can call me. I would say I am a proud hater of Joe Joyce because Joe Joyce is a hater. Joe Joyce is a hater. Period.
Man, you should have seen the Bobo Dreadlock City Broom. Me said the Bobo Dread is a man we will humble. Walk from Rima, go straight to jungle. Up on them shoulder is a big bungle.